Cheers everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we're talking about the Canon R8, in particular how I set it up and the settings that I use in my life as a professional photographer. Now, I've been shooting this for about 18 months. Typically it's my backup camera or second camera to the Canon R5, but also I've been using it in a sort of discreet travel setup with a couple of prime lenses, and I've been really enjoying using it like that. To begin with, I didn't like this camera very much. I found it a bit challenging, but it's really grown on me, and now I think it's a really, really wonderful camera. And yet, with that said, there are still a few things that I think you need to do to it to make it play nice, and I'll just go through the changes that I've made. Now, you'll probably immediately see that I've ditched the Canon strap. I'm not a hater of Canon straps at all. I've used them for many years, and I think they're incredibly good. In fact, they probably last longer than any other camera strap on the planet that I've had experience of. But here I've changed it for something a bit more discreet, which is the Think Tank, I think V3 camera strap. Not very expensive, about £20. I've been a big fan of Think Tank for the longest time. I use a lot of their bags. They've always been very reliable and rugged. What I like about this is it's kind of really small, lightweight, very discreet, and also it is super grippy. So you can throw that on your shoulder. You don't have to worry about what way round it is, and you don't have to worry about kind of placing it on the grippy part because the grip goes all the way across, and you just kind of forget about it. Works really well, and it's kind of like really comfortable to use. Having said all of that, it is, after a year of very hard use, a few of the grippy bits are starting to wear off, so I guess that's just worth being aware of. Also has these metal rings, which I've always been a bit cautious of metal rings on cameras, on camera straps, because of obviously expensive glass and expensive cameras, but these are super smooth and I've not had any problem with any scratching or anything like that. The next thing that you will probably have spotted is that the Eyecup is different. Now, when I first got my hands on this, I've got a big head and I've got big hands, so my first kind of thoughts of this, of the R8, I have made another video about it if you want my kind of overall thoughts on the camera, but my first thoughts were, it's great that it's small, but it's actually really small. And you know, when I held it up with the original Canon Eyecup to my face, I couldn't, you know, it's just like a tiny little hole with the whole world going on around it. I found it really distracting and hard to focus. So I've changed it for this thing, which is called a Kiwi Photos Extended Eyecup, and they're about £15, not very expensive. You screw the old Canon one off, chuck it away, bolt this one on, and off you go. And now when I hold it up to my great big Swede-sized head, the world just kind of fades away because this Eyecup just kind of fits perfectly into my face, and I'm just kind of fully immersed in the photograph that I'm looking at. So that's very, very cool. The next thing that you will see is the grip on the bottom. Now, this is very well documented. People talking about their pinkies sliding off the side of this thing because it's so small. I had that problem and I really didn't like it, so I got the Canon EGE1 extension grip. Now, these are about £100 new, but I got this secondhand for 40 quid because it's really just, it's not very, doesn't do anything, it's just a lump of plastic, just screws onto the bottom of the camera and just gives you about an extra kind of centimetre, which makes all the difference, especially if you've got big hands. It's a bit annoying that you have the battery grip, then the battery door, it's just a bit deeper inside, so to change batteries you just have to stick your finger in a bit more, and also to get the SD card out is the same, it's like another centimetre. It's a bit annoying, but there you go, that's what we do. Now, I know there are third-party battery grips that give you even more kind of depth to the body and probably a vertical shutter button and the ability to have a couple of batteries in there so it'll last longer. That would be ideal. I've never been a big fan of third-party battery grips, to be perfectly honest. I've had a few problems with them over the years. I don't believe that Canon do one, but you know, let me know what you've found as a solution to that problem. If you found something that works really well, I'd be really interested to hear. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is, let's talk about the SD card. So I use a variety of different SD cards. In here I've got a Transcend 64 giga, and that seems to work really well. V60, I think. You need a decent, because it's only got one slot, you need a good memory card. You don't need to go super expensive like these crazy super fast ones for other cameras. I think V60 is a kind of good place to be. Batteries, I use Canon batteries most of the time, but I also got this thing, which is because I was working overseas, I was going to be working remotely, and I needed to be able to operate without power for a while. So I bought this super cheap blue battery thing. It's a USB-C charger, and I really like these batteries, to be perfectly honest. I've been using them quite a lot, and they're I can't really tell them apart from the Canon ones. I like the blue color because I can see them in the camera bag easily with my dodgy eyesight. But let's not talk about generic batteries. I'm not trying to persuade you to buy generic batteries at all. You take your life in your hands with them, to be perfectly honest. They might fade, they might fail, they might wreck the camera, they might blow your hand off, who knows. So let's not get into that conversation. I use Canon batteries, but I also use this for if I'm off grid. It's very cool. Okay, so Jordan, is a great fan of the channel, great supporter, very grateful for you always, Jordan. You sent me a message saying that you were looking forward to this video on the R8 setting, so I'm glad to be delivering it for you. But you also talked about doing family portraits. I'm imagining with the camera on the tripod with you in the picture, like a selfie, but with the family. How do you do that? So, there are a number of ways. The easy option is just to get on a tripod and use the self timer on the camera. That will work fine, but it will work fine if it's probably a couple of adults, because you can kind of control the countdown. But if it's with children and a bigger group, that can be hard because sort of someone will typically have their sort of finger up their nose or whatever, and making funny faces. So the thing that I use is one of these things, which is a trigger. This is called a Provision. I don't know how my eyes can't actually see that, but it's about 30 or 40 pounds or dollars or whatever off of eBay, I think, and you just slot that on the top and then plug that into the remote socket, and then you get this remote trigger, which should work really good distance away. And dunk, 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 off you go. You can take a lot of frames. A couple of different techniques for shooting. We're going off piste here, but a couple of good techniques for shooting groups. Typically, if you're in them, even more so. Make sure that you take a couple of frames so that if you've got lots of young children or people pulling funny faces, you might need to take a number of frames in order to do a face swap in order to get one clean frame. Another technique that I've used quite often is to say to people, I'm just going to take one picture and it's up to you. If you've got your finger up your nose in that picture, then it will be immortalized forever in our family history. So one frame. It's your responsibility not to have your finger up your nose. That can work. You obviously don't just take one picture, you take a few, but it can kind of focus everybody because you kind of have to own the moment a little bit and be like, right, here we go, 3, 2, 1, boom, and then everybody hopefully is on the same page. Thank you, Jordan. Hope that's answered some of your questions. I don't have affiliate links for any of this stuff. If I was smart, I would. If I was a better YouTuber, I would. But I don't. This video has actually taken a while to put together, to be perfectly honest. So I'm actually in the future of how I recorded this video. So the bit that you're about to see, I recorded earlier today. All sorts of things have happened between then and now. Don't know why I'm telling you that, just for the sake of letting you know that I'm a human being, right? Also, if I'm going too fast for you, some people comment on these settings things and say that I'm going too fast. If I'm going too fast, pause. If I'm going too slow for you, because other people comment that I just need to get on with it, then I'm sorry about that. I just, I'm doing my best, but if I'm going too fast, pause the video, go and get yourself a cup of tea or a gin and tonic. Take a moment and pause. Look at the video, apply it to your camera. By the way, these are just my settings. These are my base settings. This is how I kind of reset the camera if I've been on a shoot, because who knows what settings you're going to be using on a shoot. But I come back, put all of these settings into the camera so I know I'm good to go for the next shoot. In terms of what I do with exposure and stuff like that on top, most of the time I'm shooting in manual mode or AV, aperture priority sometimes. But typically I will reset the camera back to manual and I'll put the ISO at something like 400 ISO and I'll set the shutter at 250th and the aperture at 5.6 or f8. That kind of puts me somewhere in the realms of correctness, so that if I pick the camera up, I've only got a few clicks depending on what it is that I'm doing the next day to be able to correct the settings, and then off I go. Moving into the shoot, I will adjust things accordingly. With all of that said, let's dive into the settings and see how we go from there. So I built this little photography / superhero miniature world in order to demonstrate these settings and give us something to look at, I guess. By the way, rest in peace, Sebastião Salgado. What a photographer, what a human being, and what an incredible inspiration this man has been to me throughout my photography career. Rest in peace. With that said, let's dive into these settings. Okay, so let's start with the red camera and work our way across. I always use RAW on this camera. I want the most amount of data possible from each of my files, and because this thing only has one SD card slot, that kind of almost makes it even more important to make sure that the one recorded file that you get is as good as it can be. Dual pixel RAW, I do not touch it with a barge pole. I think it's awful. Cropping aspect ratio, I use this quite a lot on the R5. Sometimes I use it on the R8, but because the R8's a lower resolution camera, you know, if you crop in to 1.6, maybe you're going to lose a little bit of the edge of your resolution. So, you know, everyone has to make their own mind up depending on what it is that they're doing. But what I would say is if you are using the crop mode, make absolutely sure that you go in and turn it off again after you finish using it, because it can and will catch you out. Moving along, exposure compensation, leave at 0. ISO speed settings, I think that's pretty much just default. That's just what I have. The HDR mode, again, like the digital zoom, I tend to leave them all off. I do use HDR mode and they're very good to capture, you know, 3 or 5 files so that you can blend them together, but make sure that it is off as a default setting and use it accordingly. It's a tool that you use accordingly. All these other things I leave off. Anti-flicker shoot, again, off. I will use it if I'm shooting in lighting where there is going to be flickering light problems and it kind of has variable levels of success. But again, off as standard. Metering mode, 90% of the time I use evaluative metering. The other 10% I'll probably use spot metering if it's something I'm shooting that's quite specific. Let's turn that back. Moving along. White balance, I use auto white balance. Because I shoot in RAW, it gets me really close most of the time. So again, probably kind of, I would say 3/4 of the time I'm shooting on auto white balance. And occasionally I will then, if I'm having problems, and the R8 does suffer ever so slightly, I found, with kind of the white balance being a little bit off in auto white balance. So then I will select the correct Kelvin and shoot like that. But for most of the time, auto white balance will get you close to where you want to go. sRGB, shooting space, picture style, standard. Typically I want, because I'm shooting commercially, I want to keep most of these things as standard as possible so that I get a nice clean raw file that I can then work on later. I have been fiddling around using these different picture styles on a different camera for another video coming soon, but not for this one. Clarity I leave at 0. Shooting creative filters. These are interesting, just different ways of kind of applying in-camera filters, I guess. You know, they're interesting. They're not really for me, if I'm honest, so I probably have that off most of the time. With the lens, I will typically have that on. Distortion correction on, should be on. Digital lens optimizer, I have a standard. I think that these RF lenses typically need these corrections, so although, you know, everyone has to make their own mind up. I don't know if you saw my 24mm 1.8 video where I quite like shooting that lens with all of that stuff turned off. Long exposure noise reduction. A lot of people talk about this. If you're using the camera on a tripod to take a long exposure picture, that it will effectively kind of take another picture and then put them side by side and do a little bit of processing to reduce the noise. Don't have a problem. You know, maybe back in 2003 that would have been handy, but these days these cameras are so good I don't really see a problem, so it kind of feels like it's solving a problem that doesn't exist. But if you're a pixel peeper, you might be able to see the difference, but again, I will probably leave it off under most circumstances just because I don't want anything messing with my nice clean RAWs. Moving along, there's nothing back there that we need to worry about. All of these things, multiple exposure, raw burst mode, focusing, bracketing, I use them all, but I leave them all off as standard. They're tools, use them accordingly. Drive mode, I start in single shooting. I will then go up into whatever it is that I need for a specific assignment, but I'll start with single. Interval timer is really cool if you're into time lapses because it enables you to take a series of pictures over time automatically. It's a whole nother story, a long story, but it's a very useful thing to have in the camera, as is the bulb timer. So if you set the camera to B, which typically is for long exposure, B is when you press the button and the shutter will stay open for as long as you keep your finger pressed down on the button. But you end up timing it with a stopwatch and whatever to get the correct exposure, whereas this bulb timer enables you to do it, and it kind of removes, typically we use these things called intervalometer, something like that, before to do all of that stuff, but now this is all kind of inside the camera, which is very useful. Silent shutter function, I'll have that off most of the time. I find silent shooting a bit weird. I quite like the audible kind of clunk or click or snip in this case. But in certain situations, you know, in the theatre, for example, or if you're shooting kind of a wedding maybe, then that silent shutter function could be really, really cool. I have my shutter mode set to electronic first curtain as opposed to electronic, because first curtain seems to reduce distortion as much as possible, and that's always cool. Release shutter without, not that I've seen distortion in either mode, to be perfectly honest, but I think if you're shooting really fast moving things like cricket bats or baseball balls or whatever, then you know, you never know. Release shutter without card, I have that set to off, because again, it's sort of belt and braces way of avoiding disaster. Image stabilization mode, I have it set to on, because whatever the hell this thing has inside it is some ninja juju and it just works really well. Customize quick controls. You can set this, you can mess around setting this until your heart is content. I won't go too far into details on those. Mine's set as default, I think. Touch shutter I have set to disable, because I find it really annoying. If you enable it, every time you touch the screen, you're going to take a picture. Now that is useful sometimes, but not all the time. So I will begin with it disabled and then adjust accordingly. Image review, I have set to hold. That means when you take a picture, it will display on the screen and it will stay on until you touch another control. That works the best for me. Sometimes I'll turn that off if I'm shooting fast action. And viewfinder display, I have set to enable, which means that the picture will also pop up in the screen so you can get visual confirmation of what you've just shot. But again, I will turn that off if I'm shooting something that's fast moving. Nothing much else there. Display simulation, I like the exposure plus depth of field, because it gives you a depth of field preview, basically, which is very useful. Anything else there? Not really of interest. We're not going to talk about video, but 4K 25 frames per second IPB I found to be really amazing. And sound recording I leave on auto. Unless I'm doing something cinematic with external mics, I will use it on auto, just because if I need to shoot a little bit of video, it's quite nice to be able to get the audio to the kind of auto ninja juju business so that you get half decent audio. We won't go too much further there, I don't think. And now we're into autofocus. So I'm using this thing in a way that I have not used a camera before. I've been shooting with Canon cameras for, good Lord, 30 years. And I typically always used to use one shot and servo sort of 50% of the time each. And I would use back buttons. Now, since using mirrorless, I've moved to my AF operation. I'm using servo 99% of the time. And we'll go into my different settings in a minute. But basically, I've gone from back button to sort of 50% front button, and then sometimes back button. I'll explain how I have all that set up in the custom settings in a minute. AF area, I have that set to spot. Whole area tracking, I have that set to off, because sometimes it can go right out onto the side, and I prefer to kind of keep the tracking within the sort of area of operation that you're pointing the thing at most of the time. Subject to detect people, you can change this around from people to animals to whatever the hell you want. I mean, I found that, you know, I shoot most of the time I'm shooting people for work, so that's kind of why it's there. And then we move over. Case A is the way to go, I would suggest. But you can, again, this is kind of one of those things that if you're shooting something, this is all about kind of how the AF reacts during different case scenarios. And I sort of shoot a wide variety of things. So versatile multi-purpose settings is the one that I go with. I have tried tweaking it when shooting specific things, and it can be quite effective. But again, if you're shooting something specific, you'll have to play with this to your heart's content, you know. Moving across, preview AF is disabled, lens driver AF possible on, AF assist beam on, okay. Touch and drag AF settings, I have to set to on because it's brilliant, right? This means that, let's go back to taking a picture, that means that wherever I move my finger, even when I'm looking through the viewfinder, the AF will respond to where I drag my finger. So you can kind of see that I'm tracking between the head there and Spider-Man in the background. And I found that to be an absolute game changer with this camera, because you don't have the rocker switch that you get on a lot of the others. Now, in a minute, I will explain to you how I've kind of replaced the rocker setting with this thing, but for the time being, let's go through these settings. Nothing really extra there. MF peaking, that means that you get a little bit of color if you're in manual focus. On the sharp bit, I have that set to on. It's not quite as good as some of the other cameras, to be perfectly honest, but it does work. Let's move along. We'll come back to AF in a minute. Now, this blue play thing, I don't really think there's anything in there that, you know, is of interest. I don't think I've ever actually been on it, to be perfectly honest. Onwards we go. Again, this is the Wi-Fi setting for how this camera connects to either computers or a wireless network or to your smartphone, and it works really well. It's the first camera that I've actually had where it does work really well. And you set it up on, I've set it up on my phone, and it just kind of pings up, and there are the pictures, and it's amazing. Especially with the Lightroom mobile on a half decent iPhone or iPad, it's really cool actually. I'm going to probably at some point make another video about that in itself. We will move on. Everything here is put on this spanner is, we'll just flash through it quite quickly. File numbering continuous, that's just the default setting. It's worth setting, if you've got multiple cameras, it's worth setting your date and time zone very, very accurately and matching the cameras together so that if you're ever sorting your pictures from a shoot, you can sort by time captured and it will be really accurate if you've kind of gone from one camera with a wide lens to the other with a long. It's a really good tip to have, especially if you're shooting something like a wedding. Moving through, there's nothing I don't think that we've got missing there. Power saving, I don't know, I just leave all of that to pretty much kind of, I'd rather the batteries lasted 10% less time, but everything was kind of ready, I guess. Oops. I have a lot of this stuff set to automatic, to be perfectly honest, although I do like this UI magnification, which means that you can, I think, is it 3 fingers? Yeah, you 3 finger the, excuse the, you use 3 fingers. Okay, I do like this UI magnification thing, which means that with 2 fingers you can tap the screen and then it becomes a little bit bigger for you. It's really useful, specifically I found when doing video, but also for stills if you're trying to kind of fine tune some settings. Moving on, touch control standard, blah, 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 nothing much there. Sensor cleaning, you need to use that a lot with this camera because because it's so small and it's got such a big sensor, it seems to really catch the dust every time you change lens. Reset camera if you want. Custom mode, shooting modes. We won't go into this now, it's a subject for another video, but it can be really useful. I tend not to use it when I'm working commercially because I just kind of have everything set to manual pretty much and go from there. Moving on, we have I missed anything? Don't think so. Moving on to the orange camera, I have my exposure level increment set to 1/3 of a stop. You can change it if you want to, but that's just kind of how it all goes, isn't it, pretty much? Don't think there's anything else there of a huge interest. And now we get to the bit that will be relatively interesting, I think, which is to customize buttons. Now, I'm not going to talk about the video aspect of it. So here we go. This is kind of coming back to my autofocus talk that I was referring to earlier, that I can't even remember what the default setting of this camera is, and I've played with it endlessly over the last year or so to try and get the best from the AF, and I think for me at the moment these are the settings that are sticking, which is to have the shutter button does metering and AF start, right? That might even be the default. The movie button is the movie button. It's pretty much straightforward. And then I use the MFN button, this little button up on the top, to get to my quick control screen rather than that one. Let me show you. So that brings me up my quick control screen, which is really cool. Customize buttons, we'll go back in there. And the reason that I do that is because I like to use the set button for ISO, and we'll come into that in a minute. Now this button here, which is this one, I have that set to eye detection AF. Now what that means is that if I'm shooting normally, let's go in close. If I'm shooting normally, if I want to focus on the cup, the Roy Riley photography mug, I can just tap where it is that I want the AF point to be. If I want it to be on, is that Batfink or Wolverine? You tell me. I know that one's Spider-Man, but you know, who knows? So I can just I can put the AF point wherever I want and I can take a picture, right? But let's say, for example, I'm shooting a portrait and I want to get AF. With that setting that I've just shown you, this button here then picks up the IAF. And what it does as well is it automatically disables the focus from the shutter button. So that works perfectly. And then I can go back, once I don't want IAF anymore, I go back to the front shutter button doing the AF. That works really well for me. Everyone else will have different ways of doing these things, but that to me is a little bit of a revolution for my way of shooting, that's for sure. Okay, this button up here, I have this set to set AF point to center, which means that if I'm doing something really crazy, like shooting an eye on the side of the frame like that, rather than having to kind of press here to get it back or press here to get it back, I can just dab there and it will always recenter. And that's kind of quite a nice simplistic way of returning the camera to kind of standard, which I like all of these little tricks, to be perfectly honest. It works for me, might not work for everybody else. In here we go, and now we have this, the little button below I have to magnify, and that works again really well because I can just hit that button to come in and check critical sharpness, or if I'm in review mode I hit that button and in I go. Again, it's pretty standard, it's just the way I'm doing things. Then we have this button which we have set to up. Okay, so that means that this thing, if you will go down, so each of these little rocker switches then moves the AF point around. It's very handy. It's a kind of more manual way of doing it than putting your finger on the screen, but it kind of works for me. I'm pretty simplistic and I like things to be pretty simplistic. Then the ISO button, I have that set to ISO because I can change my ISO. I'm a manual ISO shooter most of the time. That one, I don't know what the hell that does, to be perfectly honest. And then we have this external speed light thing, who knows. Anyway, onwards. Do we have any customized dials in particular? I just have that set to the pretty much standard as you would normally do. You can reverse those, I believe, somewhere. Then we move over to the star. And the star is a really useful thing to have because you can set all of your most commonly used settings onto the star, and that works out really well. I don't actually have this set up in the way that I would normally. What I have here is just my white balance, drive mode and image review. Typically I'd have format in here as well and a few other things. Don't quite know why that isn't the case. But the reason I have drive mode and image review is if I suddenly need to shoot something that's very fast moving, I can go in here and I can turn all of these things in the way that I want them so that I'm not getting flashback from the pictures as I take them. And I can also use my star settings to go back into these things without having to go back through the various different menus to find the settings, if that makes some sense. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate your time, and I hope there's been something in this video that helps you in your journey with the Canon R8. Remember, these are just my settings based on my experience of working with this camera, and everyone will have to find their own way. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right settings or the wrong settings. Everyone has to find their own way. Please do let me know in the comments if you think there's anything that I've been missing or could help me improve, because I'm still learning, obviously. And it's nice in the comments for people. I know a lot of people read through the comments, and it's nice for kind of that combined wisdom of the community to kind of present their knowledge so that everyone can kind of grow together. So, you know, don't hesitate to leave me a comment, and also subscribe and like and all of that stuff, because it really helps support the channel. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.